Cold 187 had always envisioned Ruthless Records as one big record label family, sharpening each other and exchanging ideas in order to be a maintainable and self-generating indomitable force. So, when Ice Cube engineered the first major exit from Ruthless in December 1989, Hutch swallowed the disappointment that it wasn't going to be on the last song, literally and figuratively, of his group Above the Law's debut album, 1990's Livin Like Hustlers. After all, Cube wasn't the only talent on Ruthless. There was still ATL, his group, MC Ren, the villainous MC, Eazy-E, the business-savvy label head who happened to rap every now and then, the DOC, a master mic technician who was cut down in his prime by an accident but was still a major songwriting contributor, Laylaw, an in-house producer and songwriter who helped put him on, DJ Yella, the silent killer behind the wheels of steel and behind the mixing boards, and Dr. Dre. Dre, the man who became Hutch's mentor on the production tip. Cold 187 always said that his family, the Hutchinsons, with a rich musical heritage that includes his uncle Willie Hutch of the Mac fame, taught him how to make music. But Dre taught him how to make records. And that's why Livin Like Hustlers, even with it being almost complete by the time Above the Law signed to Ruthless, wouldn't have been as successful without Dre's fingerprints on it. It has a mastering and sheen ideal of a professionally done, quality-optimized album. But now, Hutch was quickly growing into his own as a producer, far beyond Dr. Dre could have ever imagined. By the time Above the Law was in the studio working on their second album, BLACK MAFIA LIFE, later in 1990, Dre couldn't help but marvel at the output of his protege. Granted, a huge part of Dre's early fame was his mixing and layering prowess, and hip-hop artists had been sampling classic funk and soul records for close to half a decade at that point. But Dre hadn't heard rap music quite like this, a thick, tightly woven tapestry of funk, with main inspiration from Parliament-Funkadelic, Cold 187's melodic touch, and the hard-edged rhymes of his group. Of course, we all know that calling Dre a more than competent producer is an understatement, but the album he and his group NWA were then recording, Niggas for Life, sounded like a collage next to Black Mafia Life's tapestry. ATL's output was turning out to be a distinctive mixing and layering sensation. According to Cold 187, Dre expressed his admiration for his work by asking, "That's incredible, man. How you fit that funk into it like that? What is that?" And Cold 187 responded with a name that Laylaw had suggested to him, a name that a future all-time great would utter first on wax, a name that would become synonymous with Dre in the 90s. G-Funk. Funk is the child of several parents. It draws from rhythm and blues since it emphasizes rhythm to optimize its danceable effect. It draws from soul because of the strong emotional connection it has to the struggle, survival, and strength of Black Americans. It draws from jazz because of its affinity for improvisation and loose creativity. And it draws from Black Americans' distant yet primary ancestry, since elements such as improvisation, call and response chants, and polyrhythms are major characteristics of the musical tradition of West Africans. In other words, it gets no blacker than the funk. And James Brown, the greatest and most influential musician of the 20th century, is credited as the godfather of funk. Sometime in the mid-1960s, his R&B began to develop into a groovier, more rhythmically complex, syncopated, and downbeat-emphasized sound that was more exciting to rack and dance to. Already known as a dynamic stage performer, Brown truly hit his prime with the numbers that characterized his early funk period, which spanned the mid-1960s to the mid-1970s, a time when the first few generations of hip-hop were being born and destined to explore his catalog for musical inspiration. Also available for musical inspiration were the acts that followed Brown's lead: the Ohio Players, Sly and the Family Stone, Zapp with Roger Troutman, Chic, Jimmy Castor, Earth, Wind & Fire, the Gap Band, and Kool and the Gang were just a few of many examples that used Brown's innovations to develop their own contributions to the funk genre. But there was one particular act that would take the style further than any other, including Brown himself. During the early 1970s, at the height of Brown's powers, some of the members of his backing band, the JBs, quit to join a newer outfit that promised more experimentation. It was a collective of two funk-playing bands, both headed by singer, songwriter, and producer George Clinton, One of them, Parliament, leaned more toward funk's R&B roots, with a heavy touch of science fiction. The other, Funkadelic, preferred a more psychedelic rock approach, influencing their style with a recreational drug-inspired subgenre that emerged in the mid-60s. Together, they formed the collective Parliament-Funkadelic, also known by the abbreviation P-Funk, which came to describe their subgenre and their funk superiority. Touring together and even having overlapping members, but releasing albums as separate units, P-Funk was more than just creating great music. They created worlds. From allusions to being under the influence, through tributes to blackness and the irresistible power of the funk, to flashy outfits and colorfully designed and illustrated album art, P-Funk developed and nurtured a mythology of themes and characters that would fascinate the next generation of black music artists. And part of that generation would be Cold 187 and Dr. Dre. Both men were sampling funk records, which included P-Funk as far back as the late 80s. In fact, Dre beat Hutch to sampling the Ohio Players' Funky Warm, which contains that slithery sound from the Moog synthesizer that would become the dominant characteristic of G-Funk. But since Cold 187 came up with the concept, what was G-Funk to him? The first glimpse of it was with Vocally Pimpin', an EP Above the Law released in 1991. Yep, the Funky Warm sample is in there, as well as pieces of P-Funk. And it's thick, dense, full, and murky. The very essence of funk, down to its literal meaning. Meanwhile, Dre, for all his discovery of Hutch's invention, did not affix the label G-Funk to NWA's Niggas for Life, which was released less than 2 months before Vocally Pimpin'. And that's despite the album being funkier than its predecessor, Straight Outta Compton, and including the Funky Warm style synths and P-Funk samples. But Above the Law ran into a problem. It was Black Mafia Life that was supposed to be released in December of '91, not Vocally Pimpin'. And that's because Dre, expressing his desire to leave Ruthless Records, stalled their album plans. ATL's contract with Sony, through its imprint, Epic, responsible for distributing the group's output, stipulated that Dre receive production credit on their work. Otherwise, the contract would be null and void. Well, Vocally Pimpin', which acted as a stopgap and promotional tool, breached the contract. Although Dre was still on Ruthless and could not legally leave, at least not yet, he no longer made himself available to additional work on the label after completing NWA's album. Coincidentally, the new company to which Dre planned to defect, Death Row Records, was primed to be under the umbrella of Sony, and Dre's partner, Suge Knight, had ultimately failed to lure ATL along with them. By remaining on Ruthless, as well as breaching the contract with Sony by making a record without Dre listed as producer, ATL's deal with Epic was severed. Without a distributor for their next record, Above the Law, just like Dre, was in limbo. Eazy-E set on the task of looking for a replacement distributor for the group while dealing with the legal battle brewing between him and his company and Dre, Knight, and Sony. Meanwhile, Above the Law kept recording, hoping for a light at the end of the tunnel. On April 23, 1992, Call It What You Want was sent to radio. It's a non-choral posse record, one that brings together rappers from Northern and Southern California that could have turned out differently. Digital Underground, a group from Oakland, California, and best known for their top 20 pop hit, The Humpty Dance, in 1990, was cut from the same P-Funk cloth as Above the Law. Ruthless Records recruited them for Call It What You Want, ostensibly not only for their musical similarities, they had an EP out too, and shared homeland, but also for commercial viability. Band leader Shock G, aka Humpty Hump himself, and rapper Money B were supposed to fly from the Bay Area to Los Angeles for the recording session. But Shock G was still engaged in New York and couldn't make it. Instead, Money B showed up with someone else. Tupac Amaru Shakur, better known as Tupac. Tupac got his start in the music industry as a roadie and backup dancer for Digital Underground. He was able to parlay that opportunity into his first appearance on Wax with DU's January 1991 single, Same Song, as well as a record deal that led to his debut album in November of that year. But Tupac in around 91 or 92 was still largely an unproven entity, far removed from the star turn he would make as an MC, actor, and legend. Resigned to the reality that Shock G wasn't going to be on the song, which was already set up for 4 verses, ATL decided to give Tupac a shot instead. Tupac consumed paper with his pen the same day he got in the studio, foreshadowing his now legendary prolificacy. And when he stepped behind the mic to record his verse, he asked for the name of the style used for the beat, which was mainly constructed from Funkadelic's Freak of the Week. ATL responded with the answer Cold 187 had given Dre a year or two ago, and that led to the first mention of G-Funk on the record. No longer walled within the confines of Ruthless, the world now knew there was a musical style named G-Funk. But Call It What You Want didn't do well. The 3 previous singles from Above the Law were top 40 Billboard rap hits, with 2 of them being #1, but Call It What You Want, as the group's 4th single overall, missed a spot on all of the major Billboard singles charts. The farthest it went was 23 spots away from registering on the R&B/hip-hop songs chart. For a song that's celebrated as the first official G-Funk song, it deserved a lot better. But it was about to get worse, because about 8 months later, The Chronic happened. The Chronic hit stores on December 15th, 1992. By then, Dr. Dre was officially out of Ruthless and with Death Row Records, distributed by Interscope Records. Turns out that Sony, for all the legal wrangling throughout 1991 and 1992, had ultimately passed on Death Row, as though foreseeing the turbulence that would engulf the gangster rap label. Well, Sony missed out. The Chronic appeared on the Billboard 200 in January 1993, with the first single, Nothing But a G-Thang, debuting at number 95 on the Billboard Hot 100 by the end of the month. The album peaked at number 3 in February, and it was certified platinum in March. Although The Chronic does not have a single mention of G-Funk, it might as well have, because it draws from the same P-Funk well and harbors the same prominent bass lines and sinewy synth sounds as the album ATL was yet to put out. According to Cold 187, he was crushed. Talented though he was, he and his group were never able to match the commercial prowess of Dr. Dre and NWA. And now, here his former mentor was, on the verge of blowing up with a supposedly cleaner, crispier, and more commercialized version of his invention. How were he and his crew going to compete with that? But Above the Law finally saw light at the end of the tunnel. Toward the end of 1992, a few months after resolving their issues with Dre, Ruthless inked a distribution deal with Giant Records for the ATL album. Giant had been established as a subsidiary of Warner Music in 1990, and the new label's first foray into rap, well, sort of, had been the soundtrack album for New Jack City, a highly successful crime drama movie that ATL would coincidentally sample in their upcoming project. With a new distributor on deck, Above the Law finally issued Black Mafia Life on February 2nd, 1993, just as The Chronic was picking up steam. As much as Cold 187 came from an R&B family line, thanks to his father Richard Hutchinson and his uncle Willie Hutch, his stuff couldn't be smooth and bluesy. It needed a bite, a better match with the hardcore lyrics he and his rhyming partner KMG were going to deliver. Black Mafia Life, as revealed in the opening cut, Black Triangle, through the distorted voice of DJ Gomac, amid a chilly sonic atmosphere, describes a bleak, moralless, and lawless world under the whims of 4 self-styled multifaceted gangsters. Gomac as the Duke of Watts, DJ Total Chaos as Seldom Seen, KMG as Dr. No, and Cold 187 as Don Hutchinson. It's ranching in full effect.
Something new for ya.
Never Missing a Beat is up first, as though establishing from the very start that the album is a direct descendant of P-Funk. A sample of Funkadelic's Eulogy and Light is slowed and scratched into the sunny instrumental at the beginning, just before the main beat kicks in with the melody of another Funkadelic record, Not Just Knee Deep. It's the same record that Dre had used for the Chronic's second single, Dre Day and Everybody Celebrating. However, with Never Missing a Beat, it's darker, more syncopated, and bears an underlying flute. And the lyric interpolation precedes the one Tupac would perform in Ambitions as a Rider of his 1996 double album, All Eyes on Me, with KMG playing the hype man and the additional vocals of Cocaine, who frequently shows up throughout as the third MC. Cold 187 kicks player-fused battle bars to help make Never Missing a Beat an energetic start to ATL's long-delayed album.
Have you ever lost a battle? No, yo, cause I can take you to the darkest corner. Take your let's do this and drop dogs on you.
Why must I feel like that? cools things down a bit, allowing the listener to get in the groove of the full-length project, which is, after all, 71 minutes. This time, Soul to Soul's Back to Life joins the melody of Parliament's Can Move You, If You Let Me, in creating a regular club-oriented atmosphere circa 1992 for KMG to join Cold 187 in detailing their sordid way of life. Why Must I Feel Like That is also notable for containing the KMG lyric that inspired the creation of the term G-Funk in the first place.
A7 created it.
Yeah.
Okay. I named it.
That's right.
So you named G-Funk G-Funk.
Yeah, by accident.
Yeah, that's true.
What year? What
That's
year?
real
What
talk.
year? What year?
KMG was riding in.
Rest in peace,
my
KMG,
brother.
man.
Okay.
He wrote a verse and he said, a P-Funk tape wakes me up every morning.
Yeah.
For whatever reason. I said, say G-Funk.
Right.
We didn't know we was naming nothing.
Yeah.
right.
He just put it in a rhyme. Then we kept referring back to it. And then we realized it is G-Funk.
G-Funk.
Coming up is another solo showcase for Cold 187, and it's evident that Hutch had mastered the art of vocalization. In never missing a beat, he's whispery and jovial, welcoming everybody to the album. And here, he's gruff and hostile, bending his nimble flow to the dungeon of a beat he made from the humming sound and clamoring piano notes underlining the synthetic substitution drum break. Don Hutchinson is in full gangster mode, a far cry from his largely metaphorical Livin Like Hustlers days. Pimpology 101 acts as an interlude a third into the album, as though letting the listener catch a break from the oral and lyrical onslaught. It's a smoothed out, synth-enhanced rendition of the Ohio Players introducing the players that has Hutch and KMG giving shoutouts to their various comrades and never quite feels like filler. And then it's back to normal proceedings, with the aforementioned Call It What You Want, featuring MCs from both Digital Underground and Above the Law, Tupac, Money B, KMG, and Cold 187 delivering lyrics akin to a freestyle over the Funkadelic-fueled, guitar-enhanced beat for an orally cheerful experience. Then it's back to the dungeon, and the introduction of oddly named songs. Harder You Are, The Doper You Fall is the classic bar trading chemistry expected from ATL's rapping duo, one of the best in the business, and the first instance in the album where KMG's deepened monotone bounces favorably with the comparatively high pitch of Cold 187. Better yet, the gloomy thump of a beat, with the incorporated squishy sound loop of the Barcades Let's Have Some Fun, gives the lyrics more heft.
Alright, the shit is fly. I know Dre didn't do the motherfucker, but you know what? The shit ain't right unless I'm rapping on this motherfucker.
And then the Ruthless boss shows up, alongside Cocaine, in Game Recognized Game. Sure, it's not as enthralling as Call It What You Want, and it's one of the lesser songs in Black Mafia Life, but the showing of Ruthless solidarity and loyalty, plus the howling atmosphere created from the Fatback bands on the floor, is worth the price of admission. Finally, the Pimp Clinic has its very own song. Hutch and KMG lay the Mac down on how they successfully run their enterprise, with a bevy of babes and their minds on their money.
Just slide, all you slide. Because there ain't enough room to fit you all in my rides.
This time, the main P-Funk inspiration comes from Fat Cat, from one of the collective's bass guitarists, Bootsy Collins, and Parliament's mothership connection, Starchild. Notably, Dre used the latter in Let Me Ride, the third single of The Chronic. But here, mothership connection is used in only 2 bars per verse, Cold 187 preferring to rely on double time claps and lacing the choral section with a Fat Cat loop. The result is a more impressive 6-minute outtake for the ATL MCs to strut their pimp lyrics, and Hutch to melodiously fluctuate his voice. Pimp Clinic segues into more of the best songs of Black Mafia Life. Up first is VSOP. VSOP, which had been released as the album's second single on November 29, 1992, is a titular ode to a quality grading of cognac that stands for Very Superior Old Pale. The designation denotes the minimum of 4 years of age for any of the spirits used to blend the cognac. VSOP classified cognac is the drink of choice for Above the Law, preferably paired with the Chronic. You ain't the only one, Dre. The song has an undeniable, irresistible bounce, the result of layering a foreboding pitch variance of bass with bobbing drums and a looped snippet of Tom Tom Club's Genius of Love. Cold 187 and KMG are just trading couplet after couplet in 2 verses, the chemistry a delight to hear, and rarer in 92 and 93 than ever before. And in the choral section, they tie their brag bars together with a salute to VSOP, bathed in the sprinkle of I Can't Go For That, No Can Do by Daryl Hall and John Oates, which had been used about 4 years earlier for another notable group out east. VSOP should have been a much bigger single though. Ruthless and Giant dropped the ball on this one. If there's any song that matches or surpasses VSOP, it has to be Process of Elimination, and it does that with pure menace. Hutch raps rhythmic single piano notes and guitar strumming around a fattened drum loop of Rufus Thomas's Do the Funky Penguin Part 2 that's linked to the scratches of George Clinton's Atomic Dog, with vocals from sources that include EPMD's You're a Customer and New Jack City. It's a dark, dreary, atmospheric stomp for 3 MCs, 2 of which violently dispatch a debtor at the beginning to vocally and lyrically master. Cold 187,
Just like the Grim Reaper, but a little bit cheaper. So fool, you better have your together, cause if you're 87, he will hunt you forever.
then KMG,
You see, you can just label me the Undertaker, cause I speed up your chest for you to meet your maker.
and finally MC Ren.
The real number one, I get the motherfucking job done. Because my voice is like a defensive line. You're begging for me to come with it because I'm gonna tackle you with those rhymes.
Sometimes, gangsters have to let you know how much they really mean business. But here comes the new Funketeers, who made their debut in the vocally pimpin' EP and are back to bolster the rowdy, celebratory mood of G's and Macaronis, a dedication to the Macs, the pushers, the pimps, and the players that relies on the melody of T.S. Monk's Bon Bon V, Gimme the Good Life, which fellow West Coasters Def Jeff and Tone Loc had gotten to a year or 2 before. The song feels like a holdover for something better, although KMG, finally with a solo song, dazzles with some bars of wisdom. Who's willing to bet the Doctor of Pimpology falls in the latter category? Groupie's best friend is predictable. We all know what a groupie's best friend is. The dirty suing of Prince and Soul to Soul samples is adequate, but the player talk at this point in the album is getting a bit tired. Cocaine, however, steals the show and salvages it with a verse that goes from low tone to reverberating, with the Izzo lingo thrown in for good measure. The album picks back up with Me vs. My Ego, the penultimate track. KMG, the designated illustrator, vividly details the struggle between himself, Kevin Michael Gully, and his alter ego, the smack-dealing, cap-peeling, and pimp-dealing impenitent. Hutch's verse is not as topically compelling, but he makes up for it by taking a page from Cocaine's book in Groupie's Best Friend, go from 0 to zillion with a rapid-fire ragga flow. Plus, you will never get anyone to turn Tana Gardner's heartbeat into a complete dystopia. By the time the outro rolls in, the listener is rightly sent off with another smoothed-out instrumental that includes, of course, that ubiquitous Moog synth wail. Black Mafia Life peaked at number 37 on the Billboard 200, and it would eventually sell around 380,000 copies. VSOP grabbed the group a 4th Billboard rap hit in March 1993 with a peak of number 9. Black Mafia Life pulled in some decent numbers, and it turned out to be the best chart-performing album of Above the Law's career. But it was a cocoon next to the butterfly that was The Chronic, which went beyond hip-hop to embed itself in pop culture as 1993 progressed. By the end of the year, The Chronic was triple platinum with 3 top 40 pop hits, was still in the top 10 albums on the Billboard 200, and had completely changed the course of rap music, with gangster rap and, yes, G-Funk. What was even more painful to ATL was that straight off the heels of Dre's debut album was a protege that, in an alternate universe, should have been under their tutelage. Snoop Doggy Dogg was a fellow Los Angeles County native from Long Beach, a city about 45 miles away from ATL's hometown of Pomona, waiting to be put on. But they were taking too long to activate him, or so Snoop felt. So when Warren G, Dre's half-brother and the person responsible for introducing him to ATL, took a tape containing his raps to Dre, and Dre expressed interest, it was easy for Snoop to switch from the Ruthless camp to Sony's Solar Records, a holdover for Dre while he got his exit from Ruthless sorted out. The first recording they released together on April 9th, 1992 was Deep Cover, the title song of a soundtrack for a crime thriller of the same name. It has a hook that popularized a suffix that Hutch had adopted from the number of the California Penal Code for murder. And now, in November 1993, Snoop Doggy Dogg was releasing a debut album that would not only be more successful than that of Dre's, but also confirmed, at least in the public eye, the G-Funk pioneering status of Dre and Death Row Records.
Yo, 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 yo. They f with this, so don't even try it. Stay in the studio all you want.
Code 187's frustrations and resentment about the loss of credit for G-Funk, about the stalled progress of Black Mafia Life, about the defection of Snoop, finally boiled over in a song off Cocaine's second album, 1994's Funk Upon a Rhyme. Hutch slammed Dre, Snoop, and the Dog Pound, who were just asking for their share of the diss with songs such as the Chronic B-side, Puffin' on Blunts, and Drinking Tabouret. The name of the song with Hutch's disses? Don't Bite the Funk. But Black Mafia Life's commercial failure can't be entirely blamed on external forces. To his everlasting credit, Dre brought his innovations, preferring to interpolate P-Funk records with live instrumentation. Couple that with his continuous perfection of sonic polishing, and you have a product that was much more palatable to the masses, and consequently influenced scores of rap artists and producers. Dre may have not invented G-Funk, but he popularized it. By the time ATL's second album came out, its primary reliance on sampling and its dirty, murky feel made it sound dated. It also didn't help that there wasn't a lot of ink dedicated to Black Mafia Life when it came out. For years after its release, it would be its immediate predecessor, Livin Like Hustlers, that garnered more acclaim. And if Epic was new to handling a rap act with a multi-album distribution deal, at least it has some experience with singles deals with the Cold Crush Brothers and Stereo Crew, which included a younger Ice Cube. Giant, in existence for only 2 years when ATL came on board, was a complete novice. But with the dawn of podcasts and hip-hop websites in the 2010s, members and associates of both Ruthless and Death Row camps, many of whom overlap, gradually pieced together a clearer and more accurate origin story for G-Funk. As for Black Mafia Life, maybe a little more fine-tuning could have helped, since parts of it are bogged down by sensory overload, and the thick layering and muddy mixing occasionally overwhelm the vocals. Despite these shortcomings, it continues to gain standing among fans and critics as one of the great G-Funk albums, thanks, in retrospect, to its epic layout, unsurpassable undiluted representation of G-Funk, and being straight from the inventor of the style that would dominate West Coast rap for the first half of the 90s. Plus, Black Mafia Life should also be commended for being a more above-the-law album than its immediate predecessor, with the group's post-Dre independence and creative growth as first-rate funketeers, supreme vocalists, and conceptual artists. Maybe Black Mafia Life's initial commercial prospects and cultural impact wouldn't have been boosted by Dr. Dre's involvement or an above-the-law defection to Sony or Death Row. But more so than any project ever created, Black Mafia Life challenges the notion that Dre was this lone, isolated genius who created a movement all by himself. And with the passage of time, the recollection of gangster rap in the 90s gets less cloudy in Code 187's favor, as more evidence is put forward regarding his contributions. Because it's like what KMG would say, it's not what you know, it's what you can prove. Thanks for watching. For those new here, welcome to Rap Perspective. For the Rappleheads, I greatly appreciate your support. Don't forget to like, comment on, and share this video, and make sure you subscribe to the channel. And I encourage everyone to watch, like, comment on, and share other videos on here. See you in the next video.